You already know that the engine in your Skyhawk needs a mixture of fuel and air in the cylinder to run. Now let's see how the mixture gets into the engine. There are two basic ways used to create the fuel-air mixture in an airplane engine. The first is fuel injection, and the other is by a carburetor system. Since the new Skyhawk engine is fuel injected, which is simpler for the pilot to use, let's cover it first. First, let's follow the air path to the cylinder. From your pre-flight, you remember the air filter in front of the cowling below the propeller spinner. Well, air enters through the filter into an air box that has a spring-loaded alternate air door. It then goes to a fuel-air control unit, and finally is ducted to the cylinders through the intake manifold tubes. Fuel is distributed separately to the air-fuel control unit and then through a distribution valve, here's your valve, to each cylinder. The air and fuel are actually mixed at the cylinder. When you move the throttle to change the power, you are controlling the amount of air in the intake manifold here and the fuel to the distribution valve here. A fuel injection system is an improvement over a carburetor because it delivers a more precise amount of fuel and air to the cylinders, ensuring a more even distribution of power among the cylinders. Although ice is a common problem with a carburetor, the only likely ice problem with a fuel injection system is impact icing or blocking the air intake at the filter. If that happens, a spring-loaded alternate air door opens and the unfiltered air from inside the cowling is used. There is about a 10% power loss at full throttle when the alternate air door is open. Now, Skyhawks before this latest model used a carburetor to mix the fuel and air. A carburetor is a relatively simple system that works quite well, but under certain conditions is prone to internal icing. Outside air comes into the carburetor intake. Then the air passes through this venturi, or narrow passageway, in the carburetor. As the air goes through there, it speeds up. And just like Bernoulli said, the pressure drops. That reduced pressure pulls fuel out of the opening from the flow chamber and mixes it with the air right here. The mixed fuel and air is then ducted to the cylinders through the intake manifold tubing. Now, as we've said, carburetors are like birthday cakes. They are susceptible to icing. When the air goes through the narrow part of the carburetor, it gets a considerable temperature drop because of the lower pressure in the venturi. Also, the vaporization of the fuel cools the air just the way vaporization of sweat on your forehead cools you down. These two things mean you can get a temperature drop of as much as 10 degrees Celsius as the air moves through the carburetor. Now, high humidity and temperatures between 20 degrees and 70 degrees Fahrenheit or -7 to 21 degrees Celsius are favorable conditions for carburetor icing. If carburetor ice is going to form, where it's going to form is basically right at the venturi throat here and on this throttle valve. Your first indication that you have carburetor ice in an airplane like the older Skyhawks is a loss of RPM. With a carburetor, it's like you'd closed or pulled the throttle back because the ice is blocking the flow of air through the carburetor. And remember, you need air to mix with the fuel to power the aircraft. Since ice is common to carburetors, airplanes with them are equipped with carburetor heat. Now, if you think that you might have carburetor ice, what you want to do is apply carburetor heat. When you apply carburetor heat, the air going to the carburetor is ducted through a shroud around the hot exhaust muffler. This means that heated air is going into the carburetor instead of the cooler outside air. So, because the warmer air is less dense and the mixture will suddenly be richer, the engine will have a drop in power, and you will see a decrease in RPM when you apply carburetor heat. Your engine may even run a little rough because of the rich mixture when you've applied carburetor heat, so you can try a leaner setting of the mixture control to smooth it out. But then if you had ice in the carburetor, you're going to get a gradual increase in RPM as the ice melts away. You do need to remember that applying that carburetor heat will cause decreased engine performance, and it will also cause a richer fuel-air mixture. That's why we don't use carburetor heat all the time. So to recap, a carburetor system like this is considered to be more susceptible to icing than a fuel injection system, but there is a remedy, and it's called carburetor heat. You already knew how important the fuel and air are to your engine. Now you know where they get mixed and how they get to the cylinders.